Kirby, welcome to the Mindful Fire podcast. I'm so glad to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. It's been a while since we've caught up, Adam. So super excited to have this conversation today.
Me too. For the audience, Kirby and I have known each other for quite a while. He and I started at Google around the same time, maybe within a couple weeks of each other, 13 years ago. Kirby has had quite a few adventures since then at Google and outside of Google, all around exploring what it means to live a healthy and long life. And so today I'm really excited to have this conversation with Kirby to discuss what he's learned and specifically about how we can build healthy habits into our life. So again, welcome Kirby to the Mindful Fire podcast.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that introduction, Adam. And we met about 13 years ago, and it was around the same time where I really clarified this vision for where I want to focus in both my personal and professional life. And I was fortunate enough at Google, I was able to do a 20% project. And it really started with the question of how do you empower people to have a healthy lifestyle? And so I became one of their first full-time health and wellness researchers and just kind of started conducting experiments and research to understand not only how do people become happy, but also improve their overall health outcome. From there, I've done research and coaching and personal training for the past 13 years. Kind of recently started my own business, which I launched just a couple of months ago called Habit Harmony. And it's really around these four pillars of connection, movement, nourishment, and rest. And so that's really my focus, both from a research standpoint as well as coaching and releasing content and new technology tools to help people in those four pillars of a healthy lifestyle.
Very cool. Well, I'm excited to get into those four pillars, but I'd love to start at a higher level of just all of us want to live a healthy life, right? We want to have energy, we want to feel vibrant, but with the day-to-day challenges of life, all the things we need to do, the ups and downs of life, it's hard to build those things into our life. At least I'll speak for myself.
Mm.
I've wanted to do it for a long time. It's been my New Year's resolution for years and years. And I've made some progress, but there's still a lot to do. And one thing that has helped me slash I'd like to use more as a motivation to do this is thinking about investments, investing in my health and wellness. So I guess, how do you think about health and wellness as an area of investment in creating a life that you love?
Yeah, that's a great question, Adam. And what's really interesting in having talking to thousands of people and done surveys with tens of thousands of people, one of the biggest challenges that people perceive having is not enough time to invest in the given healthy habit or routine or practice that they want to do. So there's often this gap between what folks' intentions are and what they're actually able to do regarding their health. And so when thinking of a framework of investment, I think one currency that you could think about is time. There's definitely different dimensions or perspectives I encourage to experiment with, but time is a great one, and really prioritizing and making your health the top priority, or at least one of the top priorities. And a key thing to remember is that when we go through our week, we have these ups and downs. And so when I encourage people to build new habits, there's three phases to it. So the first phase is around cultivating joy and overcoming challenges. The second phase is building consistency. And the third phase is optimization. And so when you're thinking about investing your time, a lot of people, especially folks who maybe are more akin to an investment mindset, they might jump to the optimization phase. And that actually could backfire, because if you're trying to build consistency or optimize for a new healthy habit, but you really haven't figured out different ways that you could overcome the challenges and circumstances of your lifestyle. For example, a great example could be, I worked at an at-home fitness company. For some folks, working out at home might be ideal because they maybe don't have time to commute to the gym. And those same folks might have like children and be really busy. On the other hand, if you're being distracted by like kids or family, it might be harder for you to work out at home. So like really figuring out and experiment what works for you, what actually brings joy to this type of habit you're trying to build, and what actually enables you to overcome the unique circumstances within your life. And having a clear framing of that will enable you to invest your time and figure out how to invest your time towards that healthy habit more appropriately. And then you could have that figure out that consistent time of doing it. And then lastly, optimize the time. Maybe you're increasing it incrementally week over week or whatnot.
That's really interesting, Kirby. I really appreciate that framework. And one thing that you said there that really stood out to me was this idea of cultivating joy. And
Mm,
honestly, when I think of healthy habits, and this could just be an unhelpful story I'm telling myself, and
mm,
most likely it is, I don't really think of joy when I think of going to the gym or eating healthy. I think of sacrifice. And
mm,
so I guess I remember thinking of this book written by a Stanford researcher named Kelly McGonigal, and it's The Joy of Movement. And
mm.
I didn't actually read the book, but I heard her on a podcast, and she was basically like, do things that you actually want to do when it comes to fitness so you'll actually enjoy it. But I guess I'm curious, like a lot of people think sacrifice when we talk about like building healthy habits. And I know that sounds it's ridiculous on its face, but I'm curious, like, how do you help people overcome that? And how do you help them tune into and identify the joy that comes from these things?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. One is really starting off with reflection and intention setting. So, whether it's through your own practice or if you're working with a coach or even if you're working with someone, I always encourage folks to have wellness buddies or someone, whether it's a spouse or a friend, someone that you could talk to and have conversations around and really try to clarify what are your mental models when it comes to healthy habits. Are you telling yourself that it's a sacrifice or it's this huge uphill battle? First question, is the mental model that you have, is that really serving you? Is there a different way of perceiving what you're trying to do? And then second off, when it comes to cultivating joy, I think it's really important to think about your relationship to joy. What is it? What enables you to have joy? And a lot of people, even in the framing that we use with the word joy, we often say, what gives you joy? Or how do you find joy? The reason I intentionally try not to use that type of framing is because one, it really implies that you have to go out to find joy and or something external to you gives you joy. The analogy I use with cultivating joy, it's kind of like being a permaculture farmer. So you could use the best farming technology and methods out there available, but at the end of the day, you don't control the weather. So there's going to be external factors outside of your control that is going to cause ups and downs, but you could create the conditions for joy in your life that will kind of increase the probability that you're experiencing joy. And secondly, joy, and from my perspective, it's something that really comes from within, is really sustained from within. And there's external factors that increase the likelihood that we will experience that inner or intrinsic joy. And so, really finding how you actually could cultivate joy on a regular basis is kind of the key, I would say, to sustaining a healthy habit. And that's kind of why there's a whole pillar around connection. So that's like connection to self, connection to others, and connection to your physical environment. So that's a great avenue of deepening your sense of connection will help you have more clarity around how you could cultivate joy.
Got it. So it sounds like one, it's starting to tune into what brings you joy,
Mm.
how you cultivate joy already
Mm,
in your life, and what are the things that you're doing, the circumstances you're in, the people you're with that you feel joy. Then once you have that awareness, then you can start to kind of notice that when you're doing these healthy habits,
mm,
whether it be eating healthy meals with your family because being with your family brings you joy, or doing a particular type of fitness, whether it be yoga or surfing or hiking. Like if being in nature brings you joy, then you can be in nature while doing this exercise that's going to make you healthier overall. And then you kind of associate that joy with it. And that helps you then with the next stage.
mm.
Is that Am I kind of on the right track there?
Yeah, and another way you could see it is like, you are the painter, like you're the creator of like whether or not you experience joy. You have a blank canvas and you want to put yourself in a circumstance that's conducive for you to be able to create the painting that you want to create. In that analogy, maybe you want more of a quiet atmosphere, maybe you want to be outside in nature, and you're figuring out what's right for you. But at the end of the day, the way, and this is where mindfulness comes in well, is like the strokes that you take and the painting that you create, whether you're complete novice at painting or master at painting, like that's up for you and that's driven from within. And similar with joy, you could take the same activity and there's some people who love the same activity and people who dread it. Like a good example is like running. I hear a lot of people say like, literally they use the word hate. They hate running. Other people love it. They kind of almost get this high from it. There's a variety of different reasons why someone might love one activity and other people might hate it. Part of it could be the story that you tell yourself when you're doing it. Another part could just be that maybe your body is conducive to that activity or not conducive. So the good thing is there's no one right path to wellness, and you get to actually create that path. You get to pave that path and being really attuned to what enables you to cultivate joy as well as enables you to overcome the unique challenges within your life is kind of that key first phase of building healthy habits, almost being more experimentalist with it versus trying to just jump into like, okay, I have to do this activity 4 times a week, even if I'm
Hmm.
not entirely sure if I really love this activity, and also like prescribing it as a need versus a want. So that's like another element. Like how do you actually end up wanting to do the healthy habit versus feeling that you just need to do the healthy habit?
Yeah, I think there's something key there. And that's what that book was talking about. Is like do something you want to do, something that you think back to when you were a kid that you just loved doing for the sake of doing it. For me, actually, after I heard that, I was like, I should get some rollerblades, which is a
Yeah.
ridiculous thing to do. But I did. And I went and I bought these rollerblades and I started going to the skate park again and like doing it. And it was fun. It was really fun and I enjoyed doing it. I think, yeah, like going after something that you want, moving it from a need to a want, I think makes a ton of sense. And one thing you mentioned there is like just this prescription of, oh, 4 days a week, I have to do this. And I think that gets to consistency. I would love to hear your thoughts on how to build consistency because I personally am the type of person who sets wildly unrealistic goals, fails immediately, and feels terrible about it. Always like when I think, oh, I got to get healthy, it's like all or nothing. I got to work out 7 days a week. I got to eat healthy every meal. And that feels restrictive and impossible. And so naturally, I fail immediately and then never get to the consistency phase. And so I'm curious, how do you advise people to build consistency?
Adam, let's use that example of you rollerblading. You remember that you love rollerblading, so you took this opportunity to start rollerblading and, it's something that you enjoyed. That's the first phase. You're experimenting, you're creating hypotheses of like, what have I previously enjoyed? And then you're trying out different things. You find what you actually do enjoy. And then once you find that, you try to really carve out that time, figure out what time of the week is most likely that you're actually gonna be able to rollerblade, and, like, how often is that feasible for you to do? And ideally, the key priority habits we're trying to build, I do like to kinda try to keep ourselves honest where we are, like, roughly tracking, like, to what extent are we doing that habit, and then in terms of if you say you're doing it once a week, maybe try to incrementally build it up to maybe like twice a week or like even maybe it's like once a week, but 10% longer for each week or each month. So the key thing is like trying to incrementally increase that consistency or the amount that you do the thing that you do enjoy rather than just trying to say maybe you're rollerblading once a month and then you're saying gonna tell yourself I'm gonna do it 4 times a week. Jumping into that could be unrealistic. You'll have probably some level of disappointment if you're setting really high expectations and not hitting those expectations. So when it comes to building consistency, like be honest with yourself where your baseline is. And it's always good to work with someone else, whether it be a health coach or a personal trainer, or even just a wellness buddy, as I mentioned, like a spouse or a friend, and like have these type of conversations at least, once a month. Once a week is ideal, but once a month also works. And just kind of be honest, like, where are you at currently? What's your baseline? And how can you incrementally build upon your baseline to like have consistency as you do that?
Very good. And do you recommend that people do the same type of activity at each time in the week? Obviously, things are unpredictable to some degree, so it's not always possible, but, like, would you recommend, like, "Oh, like, Adam, you found that you have time to rollerblade on Monday mornings after you drop your kid off at school." Like, so
Mm.
try to do it every week at that time, and you have time after they go to bed to do a little bit of yoga or stretching on Wednesdays, so try to stick with that. Is that kinda how you recommend, or what do you think about that?
Yeah. So what I'd recommend when you're in that second phase of, so you figured out what you actually enjoy. And at this point in time, you're trying to figure out how do you build consistency around that. I would say the key thing is obviously it really depends on the person and the situation, which isn't necessarily like people want a simple answer, but the reality is there's not a simple answer. And so doing the time that is most probable that you'll be able to consistently do it. And a lot of folks might say, like, okay, I'm not really sure what that is. So the way you figure that out is a key thing I recommend in the consistency phase. And ideally you're doing it afterwards as well. But when you're really trying to build that consistency, I recommend having a weekly reflection, like self check-in. It could be a quick like set of like 5 questions, and keep it really simple and quick, no more than 5 to 10 minutes, so that you're like more likely to do it on a weekly basis. And ask yourself, okay, what was my like top priority for my health in the past week, and how well did I do on that? What were like the key challenges and what worked well, essentially? And ask yourself those questions, and then you'll be able to figure out, okay, like I really was able to rollerblade the week before for a few weeks in a row, and I really loved it. It was one of my favorite part of the week. However, last week I wasn't able to do it because I kept telling myself I would do it after dinner time. And maybe you figure out, okay, dinner time's not a good time for me to actually to rollerblade. So maybe that was like my big challenge. So like, how can I like change that up essentially? So like having that reflection process of like, what was my top priority for my health? Number one, last week, how well did I do? Maybe it's like a 5 point scale, like actually sustaining that last week. What went well and what were the challenges? So even just those 4 questions, and like if you want to throw a fifth in there, just like what were you grateful for in general? Those are kind of like the 5 key questions that I have the folks I coach check in on a weekly basis. And then also like what's my next priority for the upcoming week? So those are like some key questions that you could ask yourself, and that could help you really clarify and have this like kind of almost dialogue with yourself around building that consistency for whatever healthy habit you're working on. And that will like change over time, the habit, but those questions could be like pretty consistent on a weekly basis.
Very good. Yeah, that's definitely helpful. I just wrote those down. And we're going to get into it in a few moments, the 4 pillars of healthy habits. But would you recommend tackling one at a time, building consistency in one at a time? Or because again, I go to this all or nothing. It's like, well, it's time to get healthy. So I got to be working out. I got to be eating healthy. I got to be going to sleep at a good time. Then one falls, then I don't do one and I just let the whole house of cards crumble. So would you recommend one at a time? Like, how do you think about that type of change over time?
Yeah, so that's a great question. First off, we to some extent really have to biologically do all four at the same time. With that said, and I think this is really where it comes with mindfulness. And like, if you look at behavioral change studies, focusing on one thing at a time on average is more effective for folks to being able to actually change their behavior. So behavior change is difficult. And when thinking about mindfulness, just thinking about our mind's ability to have awareness There's research that shows in a given moment, this very moment right now, if whomever's listening, if you just think about it, you could only really consciously focus on up to 1 to 3 things at a given time. And the more things you try to focus on in a given moment, the more difficult it is. Best practice is to focus on like one thing in a given moment. And then if you're trying to like change new behaviors, build new habits when you have everything else going on in your life, I recommend having like one primary focus item. You could kind of have like a backlog or a queue of secondary and tertiary items, but starting off, have one clear primary focus and make sure that you do your best to really like have progress on that primary item. And then you could still have, secondary or tertiary items. But what I do when I start coaching with folks, we always focus on a primary pillar to start with and do that for at least 1 to 3 months. And then over time, we could layer on the other pillars. And in terms of what to focus on first among the pillars is, all four are really key and essential. So a couple of questions to ask yourself is, where do I feel like I'm not experiencing the level of healthy lifestyle I'd want to in a given pillar, whether it's, nourishment, movement, connection, or rest. And then, kind of maybe the area that needs most improvement could be a key area that you focus on. And or if you look at the next few months that you have, where do you actually feel like you want to focus on like making progress, or where are you actually able to focus on making progress? So those are like a key questions. But to answer more simply, I'd say like focus on one as a primary at a time, but always have the others being in the background as considerations. And you could think about how they integrate into that primary pillar.
Right. That makes sense because obviously, if you want to do more movement, you're going to benefit greatly by having a healthier diet, getting more
Mhm.
sleep, and making time for rest to recover and come back stronger. So it does make sense that they're all related, but to have a primary focus. And so just to close out these three phases is the optimization, right? You had the cultivate joy, overcome challenges as phase one, build consistency phase two, and then optimize. So just would love to just to make sure we cover off on this, just get your thoughts on what does optimization look like once you have that consistency?
This is where I really recommend folks to like look into evidence-based practices in particular. And like, especially when we're looking at, health, you're thinking about like, okay, what will actually improve my life expectancy? What will enable me to prevent injury and potential like diseases, but also what kind of enables me to like achieve the outcomes that I want. So this is where you could kind of be more methodical and like have really clear kind of performance indicators or success outcomes, and like really try to like optimize for those like key outcomes that you're tracking. Another key element there is kind of having some element of variety, especially when it comes to movement and then depending on the pillar, but we'll say movement for now is like a lot of times if you're just doing the same type of movements over and over again, like after you built that consistency, there comes a time where you need to like change it up. You need to make sure you're not having muscle imbalances. You're making sure that you're hitting a wide range of muscle activation. So, kind of, you're getting more into the details of like throughout my lifetime, how do I, now that I have this practice, how do I enable it to like, for me to achieve my long term health outcomes and other key success outcomes I'm looking for? Really building into like the evidence and the science into like that phase. The thing is, I notice a lot of folks, especially like I'm based in the Bay Area. A lot of folks are very kind of science and like data driven, and they all want to know like, okay, what's like the best thing for me to do off the bat from like a science standpoint? And I think that's a great mindset to have. But that's after you figure out what's enjoyable, what can you do consistently, then approach that like optimization mindset after you like build that joy and consistency.
I think that makes sense. It's easy to want to jump right into the latest scientific research and fad and whatever. And then again, you're putting the cart before the horse, right? You need to actually find what you like to do, build consistency, and then start to optimize around the edges. All right, Kirby, let's switch gears now and talk about the four pillars of healthy habits. I'll let you kind of walk us through them and tell us about each and why they're important.
Yeah, so the four pillars are connection, movement, nourishment, and rest. And these pillars are based upon more than a decade research that I've done, and then also just looking at a lot of different external research on what are those key groups of habits that you need in order to have a long and fulfilling life. And so starting with the first one, connection. And I think this is the one that maybe is often left out within the overall categories. Connection is really about how you connect to yourself. That's really, thinking about that mind body connection, as well as how you connect to others and your physical environment. And a lot of research shows that our healthy habits overall, they're driven less by willpower, individual willpower, than we think. And they're often driven by the extent that we're able to create conducive social and physical environments that increase the likelihood of us building and sustaining healthy habits. So, connection is really important. The other pillars are around movement. So, movement is cardiovascular training as well as your strength training. And then also building that flexibility and stability in the way you move your body. It's not only exercise, it's also how you move throughout your day-to-day life. So what your posture is like, thinking about even in this moment right now, like how are you positioning your body? Is it conducive to your overall health? And then also just, when you're like bending to pick things up and put them down, like just how you're going and actually physically moving through the world. Nourishment is around three dimensions there. So each pillar has like three dimensions that we assess and coach towards. The three dimensions there are around food awareness. So like where your food comes from, how you actually create your food, how you experience your food. So like mindful eating, and then how does your food affect your body? And then there's nutrition, which is kind of getting into like the science of like macro and micronutrients. And then lastly, there's non-food substances. So kind of like maybe, minimizing substances that might not be conducive to your health, like tobacco and alcohol. And then lastly is around rest. So of course, that's quality sleep. That's the staple of rest. But also in order to be able to like deactivate your body to engage that parasympathetic nervous system, you also have to have like renewal breaks and as well as like deep relaxation time throughout the week. And renewal breaks is actually in my research at Google, I was pretty surprised of the more than 40 different measures that predicted well-being outcomes among employees. That was one of the very highest, was actually the ability to take renewal breaks throughout the workday. And one of my hypotheses for that is because if you look at the research, our biological clocks, there's not only circadian rhythms, but there's also this rhythm within our bodies that usually, within about 90 minutes or so, we kind of are, especially like our blood glucose cycles are about on a 90-minute scale. And so we kind of need to take these little breaks, every like 60 to 120 minutes to kind of recharge and reset and like create that rhythm throughout our day, which will help us to like rest towards the end of the day as well.
There's a lot there to unpack. Let's dig into each one a little bit more. So, this connection piece, what are the three, what did you call them?
Dimensions. Yeah.
Yeah. What are the three dimensions of connection? And how can people cultivate more connection in their life, to
Yeah.
themselves and to their environment and to other people?
Yeah. So those are the three dimensions like self, others, and physical environment. And when it comes to self, I really encourage a practice of reflection and intention setting. So ideally doing it even on a daily basis, like very quickly and efficiently, like even if it's 5 or less minutes, but definitely doing it at least once a week. And this could be for your habits overall. It doesn't just have to be health related, but at least on that weekly basis, like carving out time where it is specifically towards your health. Reflection and intention setting, that's a great way of connecting with yourself. But the thing about reflection and intention setting, it tends to be a little bit more focusing on the past. Maybe you're reflecting on the past, setting intentions for the future. So, what's really important in terms of connection with self is having time where you're focusing on the present moment, connecting with yourself in the present. So, there's Daniel Kahneman, he has this great research about like there's the experiencing self and there's the remembering self. Our perceptions of those two are can be quite different. So the way we recall our past self or set intentions for our future self might not actually align with the way we experience ourselves in the present. And so having a relationship with all kind of three versions of the self, even though it might sound a bit esoteric, is something that is really foundational to health. And another key data point there is there's a really interesting study. This is quite related to mindfulness. And it actually showed that for people who are focused on either the past or the future, even if they're happy memories or happy like predictions, they tend to be less happy on average than folks who are focused on the present. And so, really being able to immerse in the present is a key element. And when immersing in the present, like having awareness of your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors, that's a key element of like building that connection to self. In terms of building connection with others, really clarifying like who's important in your life and how you want to have relationships with them, and having authentic and vulnerable conversations with them on some regular cadence is a great way of building that deepening relationship there. And just also making sure you're able to have quality time with those folks that are important in your life. And then similar with like physical environment, there's the framing that I like to think about is there's this book called Nudge, and there's something called choice architecture. So basically, like how can you design your physical environment in a way that increases the probability you'll actually do the healthy habits and minimize unhealthy habits. So for example, at Google, we did experiments where we just put M&Ms and like candy in like more opaque jars and put them like at the bottom row. And we found that, we weren't taking away the choice to eat these, types of candies at Google, but like by just making that nudge of making it harder to see, less visible, it significantly decreased the amount people would eat like unhealthy snacks. And we put the healthy snacks like front and center. So that's a way of thinking about designing your physical environment. So those are kind of those three dimensions of connection.
Got it. I can definitely attest to the Google experiments that you were running on us and they continued to do. Like it's yeah, all the sodas at the bottom of the fridge, it's behind, frosted glass
Mhm.
or whatever, a sticker so you don't actually see it unless you're looking for it. And yeah, and at the top it's just like sparkling water and teas and things like that. Definitely makes a difference when you have to work a little bit harder for it. This is all very relevant to the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, where he talks about make the things you want to do easier and make the things you don't want to do harder to do. Just in terms of when you were talking about the connection with self, mindfulness is a huge element of that. Being aware of what's going on in your body, your mind, your external environment, and bringing a kind, curious awareness to whatever's happening. And the more that you do that over time, the more you get to know yourself and build self awareness. And that kind of impacts all other areas of your life positively. So, certainly right in line with what we talk about here.
I always encourage folks to have a regular meditation practice, but I also do know a number of people whom I've coached or talked to, especially folks who experience ADHD. They say meditation is really hard for them. And so there are other practices such as like mindful walking or breath work. I've actually kind of more anecdotally, I know of a few folks who weren't able to meditate, but like by through breath work where you're actually like maybe physically manipulating your breath, even though they might have had severe cases of ADHD, they're able to do breath work exercises. I guess from my also lived experience, I find that the more I deepen my meditation and breath work practices, the more I'm able to build that deep sense of connection. I encourage folks, I given the audience for this podcast seems like they'll most likely be interested in mindfulness and maybe meditation. If you haven't tried it yet, I recommend trying a meditation retreat. So I did a 10-day silent Vipassana retreat last year, and that was completely life-changing. There's one of the most powerful ways to connect with yourself is removing distraction. And, ideally you could do this on somewhat a regular basis of just moving with distraction, either meditating or breath work or any practice that enables you to be in the present moment. But being able to go away to a meditation retreat, they kind of design that physical environment for you where they minimize any distraction. And that's like a really powerful way to be with yourself, to be with your thoughts and your feelings, and like almost kind of rechange the way that you connect with yourself in like a pretty quick amount of time. I think that's I've found to be the most powerful way to like, yeah, change my connection to self is through these type of retreats.
Yeah, that's a great point. I have also done one of those 10-day Vipassana retreats. Yeah, it's very powerful to have nothing else to do but to tune in to your body and your present moment experience.
Was there anything that was like surprising that came out of that experience for you, Adam?
I really wanted to have a life-changing experience.
Mm,
And I tried to go in with just like open to whatever was going to happen. But there was a part of me that was like, I want to either have an epiphany or a mental breakdown. Like
mm,
that is what I was looking for. And I remember there was this guy that at the end on the 10th day, you get to like talk to everybody because you're in silence the entire time. He told me that when his father passed away, he didn't cry at all. And
mm,
he thought that was weird because he like had a great relationship with his father. But he told me that when he left the meditation hall one day and he walked back to the dormitory or whatever, the housing, he saw the floor mat on the floor and it was the same one that he had at his house when he was a kid. And he just broke down and like was crying for like an hour straight. And I was like, I want that. Like, I want that experience. But for me, the experience was a lot of disbelief at how much people were farting. To be very honest, I
yeah.
was like, everyone knows that people are only breathing through their nose right now. How are these people just farting so much that they don't even care? And so I was losing my mind about that for about 4 days. And then I subsequently also was completely focused on doing it right. And so
Mm,
that's a big theme for me. This idea of there's a right way to do it. And I couldn't tell you what it is, but I am certainly not doing it that way. And that's what keeps me from exercising, honestly, and like doing all these things. It's like I just don't know what the right way is. And because
mm,
I don't know what it is, I just keep doing the unhealthy stuff that I do,
mm,
like eating fries, for instance, right? That was a big experience for me. It's just like like a couple times I went to the teachers where you could like ask questions and the guy was basically like, "I feel like you keep asking me the same question." And I'm
mm,
like, "Yeah, I do." And it wasn't until like the ninth day that I realized like those are just thoughts. This experience of is this the right way to do it? Am I following the instructions right? Is just a thought. And it's
mm,
me trying to get a specific experience, the
mm.
epiphany or the mental breakdown, rather than just like experiencing it. That was my experience during the thing, but it was very cool. It was very difficult, and I would do it again, but I have not yet done it again because I have 2 kids.
Do you think there's kind of an element of like maybe that you could like trust yourself and kind of like if you build that deep connection with yourself, with others, with your environment, like even if you don't scientifically know the right way, is there potential that you could create at least hypotheses of like what is the right way by just trusting yourself, trusting your intuition, and also like trusting if something enables you to cultivate that joy and like overcome challenges that at least you're on the path of the right way. Like you might not necessarily have all the data and evidence that you need, but at least those are some like initial kind of first steps that you could build trust that you're on the doing the right way.
Absolutely, and I think also just, like, letting go of the idea that there is a right way.
Mm,
It's a combination of letting go of that, and one of the mindsets that I've practiced and tried to cultivate over the years is there's no right or wrong way to do things. There's just learning, progress, and growth,
yeah.
and kind of the 2 sides of the same coin, trusting myself and cultivating more and more trust with myself
Mm,
is essential. And I think is a lifelong practice and some people start off with more but I think over time it's really about connecting with yourself, knowing yourself through greater self-awareness, and then trusting yourself, trusting your intuition, trusting the where you're at in life and where you're going and the progress that you're making. And like a perfect example of that is like the progress that I've made with this podcast and this business,
Mm.
right? There's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of procrastination, there's a lot of what's the right way, looking outside of myself for the right way to do things. But ultimately, it's like, what do I want to do? I get to create this. I get to do it in my own time, in my own way. And more, I've been able to do that. And I've been off work for a couple months now, just taking some time off. And I have noticed the full gamut of
Mm.
starting off really intense, like, gotta make this happen, forcing, and then moving more towards trusting the progress that I'm making. Just the good feeling, the enjoyment of the process. I hope and I assume that it will continue.
It's
Yeah,
great. It's great that you have that awareness, the importance of trust, and then also like the importance that like maybe the questions that we ask ourselves or the stories that we tell ourselves aren't always the best serving, and trying to frame those questions and stories in a way that does kind of enable us on that progress journey.
exactly. Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about the other pillars, the
Yeah.
second pillar of movement. And we've talked a
Yeah.
good bit about movement, but just, yeah, how can people cultivate more movement in their life? You mentioned the three dimensions, but just share
Yeah.
them again and how can people build more movement into their days?
Yeah, and for anyone listening, like when thinking about these three dimensions, like I always really encourage folks to be in your body. So like, even taking this moment now to like be in your body. And the first one is around cardio respiratory. So just thinking about your heart beating, the way that your blood is flowing through your body, the breaths that you're taking, and the relationship between the two. What's really fascinating is if we slow our breath down, we're able to controlling for other factors, we're able to slow our heart rate down. And so there's this really deep relationship between our respiratory system and our cardiovascular system. And that's also like the systems that are most likely to kind of fail at some point. Cardiovascular disease is the number one cause of death, at least in the US and most other countries. And so really having, again, that relationship with these systems, but also thinking about how can you improve the capacity and performance of these systems. Again, of course, first starting off with like finding the joy elements. And so, maybe in terms of like time efficiency from a cardio standpoint, maybe, running or rowing might be more optimal from like a scientific standpoint than say rollerblading. But at the end of the day, if you don't really enjoy running or rowing, but you do enjoy rollerblading, it's a lot better to do some rollerblading for your cardiovascular system than imaginary like running or rowing, essentially. I think a lot of times when people hear cardio, they have different relationship to it, but a lot of people that I've worked with, they don't like cardio exercise. So it's kind of like finding a way of like, rather than it being a chore or something you have to do, think about it as something that like is actually a core part of who you are, a core part of your body. And it's a way of actually supporting and like being of service to yourself, nurturing yourself. That's that key dimension there. And then, of course, strength training. It's really important that we're, at least building muscles to an extent where we're functionally able to navigate throughout our world, especially as we get older in life. It's important to have that strength and stability. There's someone I really recommend for folks interested in like the longevity space is Dr. Peter Attia. He wrote this book called Outlive. He also has a podcast called The Drive. He has a great framing around like in addition to preventing like cardiovascular disease, like another key unfortunate area where a lot of the older people have issues is with falling. And so building strength and stability will really help you in older age to avoid having like more difficult falls and potentially really debilitating injuries from that. And so really thinking about movement is not only a way of finding joy, but also a way of like providing health for your present and your future self. That's a key element. And then the last element is around that, like what I call mobility. And it kind of goes into like both stability and flexibility. So like your ability to like balance and also like kind of like stretch out your muscles. And it's really good to have like even for about 5 minutes before and after each strength or cardio training. So you really want to hit all three dimensions essentially. Like I kind of see those as like similar to like the macronutrients of like fat, carbs, protein. Like just as you need all three, you kind of need mobility, cardio, and strength training.
Yeah, and again, this is an area where I overcomplicate things, I think,
Mhm.
but I either am, like, going in the garage and, like, lifting the weights and just, like, couple of pumps here and there,
Yeah.
or I'm like, "Oh, I gotta, like, have a whole workout program that I gotta do and commit to," and there's, like, no middle ground, but I guess, like, what would you recommend to somebody to get started in strength and stability and even flexibility? I mean, I know they're different things, but
Yeah, so it's similar to the pillars. So when I work with someone that I coach, we find a pillar and then we also focus on a given dimension. So it doesn't mean you ignore the other dimensions or the other pillars, but like your primary focus is in one dimension for one pillar. And I know that it sounds rather like methodical, but it's actually meant to be methodical. So like you mentioned James Clear and his one of his main theses is that you rise and fall to the level of your systems, not your goals. And the analogy he uses that is that like all Olympians have the same goal. They want to win a gold or some medal, but not all Olympians win a gold. Only like one per event per year. And the difference is the systems that they create. And so, the system that I'm sharing with you, which I call habit harmony, is one system that you could pick and take from it what you will. And so I would say, again, starting off when it comes to, pick out a given dimension. So whether you want to focus initially on strength, cardio, or mobility. And then once you pick that dimension, start with phase one, start with cultivating joy and overcoming challenges. So figure out, be like, and when in phase one, I always encourage people to be like an explorer or a scientist, whatever analogy resonates most to you. And the explorer analogy, like it's a little bit more intuitive, kind of like imagine you're on, a hike and you could take whatever path you want and you at least have a compass so you know how to get back. Kind of follow your intuition. Like what do you think will bring you the most joy? What do you actually think will fit in your lifestyle? If you're more of the data driven, like science perspective, you could say like you could create hypotheses and then like test out those hypotheses and see what you actually find enjoyable and what's actually doable. And then from there, you build that consistency and you optimize. And then you kind of like start layering in other dimensions and other pillars. So that's kind of like the process that I encourage folks to go through. That's kind of like the system that I've found to be pretty effective with the folks that I coach and is like based on the research I've done. Always like pick from kind of build your own system and like pick and choose from different systems that you learn about.
thank you for that. I like how
Yeah.
the 2 things support each other, right? You pick
Yeah.
a pillar and a dimension to start with, say strength training, and
Yeah.
then you start from phase 1. What brings me joy? What are the challenges I'm facing in doing this, and how can I
Yeah.
overcome those before I then build consistency? Then and only then do I start optimizing further on that. And then once I have that in a good place, I can then focus on another pillar and start building there.
For each phase, like you don't necessarily have to get to phase three before you could start on another like dimension, but like at least get past the first phase, where you're starting to build consistency. Then you could start being like, okay, like I have a good momentum here. Like, don't keep that momentum going. But if you feel like you could keep that momentum going and like layer in something else, that's great. Ideally, you're kind of like hitting all these. There's a total of 12 dimensions to this framework. Like
Right.
I see all 12 of them as necessary. Like the way I built the framework is I asked myself the question. It's kind of like an analogy for a plant. Essentially like a plant needs water, sunlight, nutrients, and the right temperature. So there's like those four elements or four components to like a plant surviving. We need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to move. And then the last one I added in there is just we also need connection to others and to ourselves. And that connection piece kind of is like the tide that lifts up all the others. All the others go up and down based off that. So I try to create the minimal amount of things that are necessary for a healthy lifestyle in this kind of framework, essentially.
Very cool. Let's spend a couple moments on the other two pillars. So the next one
Yeah.
is nourishment. Tell me a little bit about that.
The first mention there is really around awareness of our food. And so this is something that you don't necessarily have to like go deep into the different, like you mentioned, like what's the right path. And the nice thing about awareness of food is it's something that you could do in the present moment. Actually, a practice that I do before most of my meals, especially pretty much all my meals that I eat at home, it's something called take five, where you take 5 moments through like 5 breath cycles. Once I have my food right in front of me, I will kind of for each finger to help me with counting, I'll do a breath cycle and I'll think about one specific ingredient in the dish that I'm eating. When thinking about that, I'll think about where it came from, like how it got to me, and then like the experience of actually eating it and enjoying it. And that kind of helps me create more awareness around my food. It creates more gratitude, probably will lead you to be more likely to eat healthier food. It's not guaranteed for everyone, but the more you have awareness of like where your food's coming from, how it got to you, what it's like for you to eat it, and then also really importantly, how it affects your body. This might sound a little bizarre, but also like a in addition to a mindful moment when you're about to eat, the other key time I recommend folks to do mindful moments is when you go to the bathroom. A lot of times when you go to the bathroom, your mind might wander or might go different places, but you're guaranteed to go to the bathroom at a certain cadence, like for most people, at least once a day or at least once every other day, probably multiple times a day for more people. And it guarantees you will have those mindful moments where you're not lost in your thoughts. And you could also like check in with your body, like how is your body feeling? Like, is it, and just also like seeing what your stool or your urine looks like. And is it look healthy? Does it seem healthy? And it's a good way of like checking in. Are you getting enough water? Are you eating the right things for your body? Because every body is very different. So there's not a right way to like, there's not one diet that fits all. And so having this awareness of like the food cycle is really important to build and develop.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I could certainly do with incorporating some of that into my day. I
Mm.
laugh because I read this
Yeah.
book, Intuitive Eating, and I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, this is gonna be it. This is gonna change my life." And my wife is like, "Are you kidding me? Like, you just eat Domino's pizza until you're stuffed to the brim, and you're
Mm.
gonna be now an intuitive eater?" But
Yeah.
there's a lot of value to it. It's a practice like anything else. So, nutrition wasn't my strong suit. My wife and I joke that they don't teach nutrition in Florida. Sort of true. Well, let's shift gears to rest. Tell me a little bit about how people can improve their relationship to rest and actually make it more of a part of their life.
Yeah, definitely. And just a quick note on the intuitive eating element with like the dominoes, like that's kind of maybe like habituated eating, more aware eating. If you are maybe having the dominoes, that might be like what you're habituated towards, but like having awareness, like, okay, how does this affect my body? How does it affect my energy levels? Is this actually like increasing my energy, increasing the sense of joy I have like in the long term? So that's kind of the awareness and just the last 2 dimensions, we don't have to go into it, but nourishment is around nutrition and non-food substances. So like the nutrition is where you get into the science of the macro and the micronutrients. I think it's important with eating that we're not only being intuitive, but we're also looking into the science of nutrition. And so that's why those like are 2 different dimensions there. Yeah, and then when it comes to rest, of course there's like quality sleep. And I noticed when helping folks with sleep, and I'll admit, especially when I was kind of more like in the tech world, working at Google and kind of being younger in the middle of a city, like just having a lot of energy. Rest has historically been my personal biggest like challenge of a pillar, both through my own lived experience and working with folks on rest and having designed sleep programs at Fitbit when I was a researcher there. What I've come to find is that you can't only look at sleep in isolation. Of course, connection is a big element there, but also our sleep and the way that we're able to sleep, it's not just a matter of like the wind down and like when we're actually in those sleep period. Basically, our entire day and what we do throughout our day is really affecting our sleep later on at nighttime. That's why there's not only the quality sleep dimension, but the other two dimensions are around renewal breaks and relaxation. And so within a given day, it's really important to build that rhythm. A lot of folks have heard of like circadian rhythm, which is the rhythm within a given day cycle. But there's also our biological systems. They're on a smaller time scale, which is often between 60 to 120 minutes. In particular, like our blood glucose is typically on around like a 90-minute time scale. And this is why you'll find like in meetings that people, once you kind of go beyond like 1 to 2 hour long meetings, you might notice your energy levels start dropping. People naturally have to like they call it bio breaks, so they go to the bathroom, they have to get snacks. Our body needs that, and so actually like scheduling it in through the renewal breaks, as I mentioned, like renewal breaks were highly predictive of well-being outcomes in the research I did at Google. And I was quite surprised how high it came ranked up. And so just having like scheduling that in, so if you're having back-to-back meetings, maybe like try to get 5 minutes in between where you're just giving yourself a little bit of a break. Or maybe like if you have a bunch of meetings back to back, give yourself like a 30-minute like in between like renewal break. So things that could be renewal breaks, it's basically at least like moving from where you're at, because you're not just sitting at your desk the whole time. It could be like eating healthy snacks. It could be doing like a quick like take five mindfulness, or like a few minute mindfulness or breath work. So actually like scheduling those renewal breaks are really important, and I think often overlooked, because if our mind is just running throughout the day and we just expect to turn it off when we go to sleep, or like when we wake up in the middle of the night, it's not really a fair expectation to have for ourselves. So like having those breaks throughout the day is like very essential.
Got it. I think practical advice of schedule into your day, like schedule a meeting with yourself where you can
Yeah.
just get up, go for a walk, hit the bathroom, grab a snack, and then come back is really important. Yesterday, I had like a back to back day of recording podcasts, having calls with people, and it was great, but I was exhausted. And yeah, definitely didn't feel like I slept great and that I woke up feeling refreshed. So it's really cool to understand that like it's happening throughout the day. All right, Kirby, let's switch gears now into what I call the mindful fire final four. Are you ready?
Yeah. Sounds
All
great.
right. So the first question is about envisioning. And
Mhm.
I am a big believer that we don't need to wait to reach some financial goal or some milestone of life like retirement to start living the life that we want to live. And a lot of what we talked about today is all about living a healthy life each and every day and little by little. And so I'm curious for you in your life, what is the big vision that you're building towards and how are you living it right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, the vision that I'm really building towards is I see success is my ability to empower others to live a long and fulfilling lifestyle. And so I'm just kind of really taking a first principled approach of asking myself every day, I have this post-it in front of me, how can I be of service today? And when I think about being of service, it's how can I help people live long and fulfilling lives? And so I'm just every day going through that exercise of what can I do today? Like, what are those three things I could do today to help people on their journey of a long and fulfilling life? Looking at that long term, like what I'm focusing on is being a teacher and being a coach, like taking all the things that I've learned by being on this mission for over a decade now and learned so much. How can I share that with others? How can I teach others? How can I coach others? And how can I continue to generate that knowledge through my research? So that's really where my focus is on.
I love it. And yeah, I mean, I think today's episode is a perfect example of you as a coach, as a teacher. And, you're not just making this stuff up. You've done a decade of research. You've I'm
Mhm.
sure you've read all the research on all of this, and it really shines through. So, if people want to connect with you and benefit from your knowledge and your experience and your wisdom and your research, I highly recommend they reach out. And in question 4, we'll get a chance for you to share where they can do that.
Yeah.
So, question number 2 is, what piece of advice would you give to someone early on their path to financial independence?
Yeah, I would say that the key thing is clarifying your priorities. Like, really, what is most important in your life, and really, what is a need versus something that you currently assume to be something you need. Like, what helps you cultivate joy when you're thinking about creating a budget or how you're going to invest your time and your money? Focus on that priorities through like what enables you to cultivate joy. And if something is potentially costing a lot of time or money or energy, and it's not really serving you, it's not helping you bring that joy, and it's not really enabling some other like moralistic requirement, then I would say deprioritize that. And that will kind of help you focus on having that financial independence.
Yeah, great advice. The third question is, what piece of advice would you give to someone getting started with meditation and or mindfulness?
I would say the biggest advice that I have for someone starting with meditation is I hear a lot of folks say, I'm not good at meditation. Like, whenever I try to meditate, I have all these thoughts that come into my mind. And what's interesting about that is that's kind of like the first step. That's the first insight. There's something called the default mode network. And essentially, our mind gravitates towards thought. And so, when you first start meditating, if you notice your thoughts, you're actually making progress. You're on the right path. So don't get disenfranchised when you're noticing a lot of thoughts coming up, but instead accept that thoughts are coming up and also recognize that's actually like the first step on your meditation path.
Yeah, that's huge. That's a really good advice, Kirby, because yeah, that's what I experienced when I first started meditating. And the thing I hear from most people is that I'm doing it wrong, I'm bad at it, my mind's all over the place. But what I counsel people is exactly that. Expect the thoughts to come. It's
Mhm.
what your mind does. It creates thoughts. So expect it and realize that when you notice your mind has wandered into thought and you bring it back, that is the practice. And that is like doing a bicep curl for your brain. And
Mm.
so it's not a bad thing. It's actually you making progress. And finally, Kirby, how can people connect with you online, learn more about what you're doing, and learn more about your offerings, your coaching offerings, and all the things that you're putting out into the world?
Yeah, definitely. So our website is habitharmony.com, and we have free content on there. We also have a intro to healthy habits course where you could kind of do exercise guided exercises to go through the different pillars that we discussed today. And you could also sign up for a free coaching session as well with myself. So yeah, habitharmony.com. That's a great place to learn more about how you could build this healthy lifestyle and enjoy a long and fulfilling life.
Fantastic. We'll link all of that up in the show notes. So wherever you're listening to this, you can just pull up the show notes and see the link to learn more about Kirby and his offerings and the free course he's putting together, and then book a free coaching session where you can talk about your specific challenges and goals. Thank you so much, Kirby, for being here. I absolutely love this conversation. I learned a ton. I'm going to go back and listen to it a few times and pick my pillar. I think strength training is going to be number one for me. And I got to get back to rollerblading. But just want to
Yeah.
say thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom with the audience.
Yeah, of course, Adam. Really appreciate you having me on the podcast. And it was really enjoyable experience for myself as well. And hopefully, folks listening were able to learn something and identify at least one thing they'll take away from the conversation and try to apply to their life today.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam.